In this video, I'm asking the question, how did they really play? So I got an interesting comment from Bob Stevens 4104 on a video. And in it he said, AD&D played raw, which is rules as written, is objectively better just as ask a browser. So I didn't know what a browser was. I actually had to search this, and it led me down a really interesting rabbit hole, if you like, for something that I kind of had an interesting experience with it. So I want to thank Bob Stevens 4104 for the comment. It's great. It led me on to quite a journey, and so I really appreciated it. So what happened was I had to look up what exactly a browser was, and what I discovered is that it's a community of first edition AD&D players that argue, or maybe even OD&D, the original OD&D, this stuff. I don't have my chainmail. I was looking for it. I was gonna look. I was gonna show the chainmail and stuff, and unfortunately, I can't find it. I don't know where it is. So, I don't know. It's tucked away amongst all my books somewhere. But anyway, so what happened was I had to investigate what the browser thing is, and I just want to start off right at the beginning here saying that I am absolutely no kind of an expert on what browser is or what browser play is. This is basically just from my research, but it uncovered an interesting thing from my past, and that's sort of what prompted me to make this video. So basically, browsers, it's a form of play which they argue was the original way that this game was played, and I tend to agree with them. And the reason being is that oh, just a minute, my dog's trying to get in here and she likes to eat books, so just one moment. There we go, no book eating dogs allowed in here. Okay. So basically what it is the browsers argue that the original way that D&D was played was more as a war game, and that's why I wanted my chainmail rules, because I wanted to show that yes, indeed, that's true. The OSR game, or 0E game, started out originally as a bunch of a war game rule set that had rules in it called chainmail, and it sort of developed into D&D out of those rules. So the genre of role-playing came out of that, and so it was meant to be played on a big table, you know, with minis, and wargaming was more known back then. Role-playing was just brand new to the scene. So it makes sense to me that people would have played that way. So what I found really interesting is that my very first game of D&D, now I was very young when I played it, and when I think back to it, there were some key things that happened that I sort of had forgotten about. And this kind of triggered it. Was when I played in my original game. Now this would have been 78, 79, around then. And I wasn't very old. I think I was, I don't know. It must have been 12 or 13. So, it dates me, doesn't it? But anyway, so what happened was I played at that table, and it was a big table. In fact, it would have been right around the time these books were released, the year these books were, or this book anyway, was released. So I was sitting around this big table, and they had on a grass mat, and they all had these minis, and it really felt like a different game than I came to learn about later, when I came to, because the game that I got to play was this one, was the one that, now this is just a PDF printed out, this game was what I played, but the original one that I started on, like I say, the game that I first played was way before that book came out. So, and the rules, if I remember correctly, they were using these. So they had, and they may have been using the chainmail rules, and it was very much like a war game. And so the entire time that we played, we basically only had one encounter in this big on this big map, we were traveling somewhere and we had to fight a bunch of giants. And it had very much the feeling of sort of a drop-in. You would just drop in and play if you could or if you felt like it, and if you couldn't. That's how it felt. And there were a lot of people there. There must have been, I don't know, 15 people playing? It was very crowded. And the DM had a really nice boxer. I remember that. So anyway, it just had this really strange feeling to it. And I got to play a 3rd level fighter. And when the giants showed up, I ran away, not knowing anything, and I got in trouble for that. Fighters don't run away, especially 3rd level ones. Okay. So I had to go fight the giants, and I didn't die. That was good. But I only ever got to play that one game. For whatever reason, I'm not sure. But it really stood out to me as a lot of fun. But it didn't stand out to me as D&D, but it was D&D. That's what they were playing. One lady came in. She was just irate. She was so mad because the character she had been playing for 5 years. So these were very hardcore old school gamers here. She was just irate because the DM had given her character to another player to play, and that player, of course, got her killed because never let another player play her character. But anyway, so she was irate about that, and she was mad that this character she had put so much time in had been killed. So, looking over the browser stuff, basically, my understanding of how the browser thing works is, first off, you play the rules as they're written. So, I don't know if you're... I imagine most of you are familiar with the first edition AD&D, but the rules are really complex. Most players, including myself, when I played this game, skipped over all kinds of the rules. And that because they didn't make sense. Now, they do make sense in the context of the very first game I ever played, but they don't make sense in context of all the other games that I ever played. But I didn't realize that until Bob Stevens made his comment. And I started thinking about it, and I looked into the browser thing. So, the browser thing, first off, time in your campaign world has to be matched with time in the real world. So if you spend a month traveling, let's say from August to September, and you're traveling to a new land, and you do that journey in a game, you can't pick up your game again until August. Or September, rather. You have to let that amount of time go by. And the reason for that is that other players that might want to come and drop in on the next game, those players are taken out of that game, but these new players can play all the way up until that time, and even beyond it. And then their time is frozen, and those characters can't play again until you pick up with the new players, and they start playing. This is very much how they were playing that first game, I believe. If memory serves me right, this is sort of what they were doing, absolutely. So that's one aspect of it. That's a huge aspect of it. And if you think about it, why it's such a huge aspect, let's say you're going to build a keep, and you want to clear some land, you want to build a keep. Now, that's going to take, well, that might take, it might be your son that actually finishes the job. It's a huge undertaking. It's going to take at least 20, 30 years to get it done. So in this style of play, it kind of makes building castles and stuff. You can get started on them, I suppose, but it's going to take so long for it to be done. It's going to take your character out of the game for that long. You're probably better off just going and stealing it, which I think is a fascinating concept. It adds different pressures to the heroes than would otherwise be there. The other thing I really like about it, just using the time that way, is that it allows your game to be just absolutely huge. So another aspect of the browser system that I thought was really interesting was that they have what they call patrons, and basically they take a lot of the game world and hand it off to players that aren't in the game. So again, in the example, let's say your hero is busy traveling to another land and it's going to take a month, so you can't participate in the next game. So you show up at the next game, and the DM says, okay, well, you're here, you can't play that, but you can play these orcs, and just hands you the orcs. Or says, here, organize and understand how these orcs would happen. Or you can use this orc army to fight the players. That kind of thing. So they're still in the game. They still get to participate. Now, they may get to participate with a henchman or a hireling, or maybe one of the villagers or something like that, too. And it says quite quite specifically in the player's handbook when I went back and I took a look on sort of how to play. It very much, the rules emphasize that players can have multiple characters and that it can be really nuanced in this way. Anyway, you'll have to believe me. And on page 7, if you take a look at page 7, you'll find it. It's in here, the game. There's one paragraph where it definitely gives you the impression this is how the game was intended to be played. And I believe that it was. Like I say, role-playing games were new. People didn't really know how to play them that well, especially 5 years ago when this lady had started, this character. But they did know wargaming. And so this grew out of wargaming. So another piece of evidence that I have to suggest that that's the case is if you look at the monster manual. Now this always perplexed me as a DM. It was one of the rules I had to just ignore because none of it made any sense. But here we have number appearing, say for lizard men, 10 to 40. How do you have, that's an army. That's an army. How do you have an army of lizard men appearing for a party, say, of like 5 people and going through an adventure? That didn't make any sense to me. Or as a wilderness encounter. I had to curb wilderness encounters and stuff all the time because they were just so absurd in the monster manual. It's like, how can I throw that at a party? They're all going to die if I do that. I haven't released it yet, but I've got a meme making fun of that. Only first edition players will be able to get it, so I suppose it'll cause all kinds of anger. But anyway, I thought it was funny, and basically to a first edition DM, a badger and a dragon look like the same thing, and the reason for that is because on one of the wandering tables you can roll a dragon or you can roll a badger, which is one of the absurd things again. So it was the numbers, and it was just the. But in the context of a war game, the way that I had originally first played it, where we had this big grass mat, we had all the scenery set up everywhere, and we were basically measuring how far you could go in inches, because the measurements for how far characters can move are in inches, and monsters, how far they can move in inches. It suddenly makes sense why you could have that many monsters in an encounter, because if you think about it logically, if you went on an adventure to explore a dungeon, you would take a caravan with you. You would take men-at-arms, you would take henchmen, you would take all kinds of servants, you would have several wagons, you'd have backup stuff, you'd have multiple types of armor with you. That is how, that's what you did if you went on crusade, right? What's the difference between going on a big adventure and going on crusade? Not much. In fact, they're probably modeled after each other. So that was a revelation to me. So I started putting the whole thing together, and I started realizing, you know what? I think that these guys are onto something. I really do. I've never played that way, except maybe that one game, and at which point I wasn't even aware. I didn't even see these books until years later. Somebody introduced me to them. After that, I hadn't played D&D for a little while, and then I just started making up my own rules, because none of us could afford the books or even find them, knew anything about them. But I understood the basic premise of the game, so I just started making up my own rules and my own games, which was a lot of fun. So, here, let me just see here. Yeah, I think that's the whole gist of my video here, is just that I think, and one of the things that I think might have happened is that Gygax in the Dungeon Master book, he does reference using modules, and it's kind of interesting because it seems at odds with other parts of the monster of the Dungeon Guide where he's talking, and it seems almost like modules were sort of a business opportunity almost. Here we can make these modules, people will buy them, and it seems almost to me that the D&D kind of morphed into what it is today because of business opportunities with modules and stuff. Because if you have other players playing the monsters, other players deciding what countries and stuff do, other patrons they call them in the browser, and you have other patrons running different parts of the world, there is really no need for modules. You are going to have so much action going on, especially if it's war games, right? if it's all going to be played out like as war games, and then the occasional dungeon. Which something interesting about that too is in my research about dungeons, and I really like this. Somebody had suggested, I don't remember who it is, sorry, but somebody had suggested that what dungeons were are not abandoned dungeons underneath castles, because let's face it, that really honestly does not make any sense. But it's more a symbol, or a sort of a Jungian dreamscape, if you like, of exploring the underworld. So when you go into a dungeon, you're really exploring the underworld, and I think that's really awesome, and I think that's why it works so well. I think that's why, because that's sort of a touchstone sort of for human nature, that there's an underworld. I mean, in absolutely every mythology that I've ever encountered, there's always an underworld. Nobody will have any problems thinking of an underworld, knowing an underworld. So when you have a dungeon and you're going in and you're exploring it, though it doesn't make any sense in the context of the real world, it does in a symbolic sense. In all our minds, it makes sense. And I think that's why, because I've always found that kind of a mystery. Why can we have dungeons that don't make any sense? And I've always strived to try and make the dungeons make sense. And it's good, but it's not necessary. I would do that, but I noticed that the players didn't care. Players never questioned why some monsters were able to live in one room and there was another set of monsters outside of it that were totally at odds with each other. They would have been fighting, but for some reason down here they can just all unite with the single purpose of destroying player characters. Nobody ever questioned it. Not ever. Not once. I did as a DM, and think about this stuff, creating the world. These dungeons don't make any sense. Even the published ones, they rarely make any sense. What the hell's going on here? But I think that that's what it is. It doesn't need to make sense, because once you start once you get into that world of symbolism and mythology, all of a sudden our minds kind of shut down and we just are willing to accept crazy things. It's been that way. It's been that way since the dawn of time, as far as I can say. I mean, it's where all our myths and stuff come from. Yeah, I think that that's all I wanted to make this video about. Is just this browser idea, and that maybe we've been playing this wrong. Please leave me a comment what you think. Do we play it wrong? Have I played it wrong? I never used weapon speed. I never used even the amounts of monsters that the monster manual suggested. I used to cut rules out of here all the time that didn't make sense. And now when I go back and I look at it, the rules that I was cutting out were basically the war game rules, is what I was mostly cutting out. I think that's why, like, when second edition D&D came out, it was kind of like or even the Holmes Mauvais books came out. They were they allowed people to play the way without it being a war game. And let's face it, being a war gamer is a very specific kind of play type. It's a very particular style. One that I'm not really... don't get me wrong, I'm very good at strategy games. I have a lot of fun with them, but I don't have a lot of fun with really massive rules. I don't mind games, obviously, like Rolemaster and whatever, which I've been quite open about being my favorite game, because those are in my opinion kind of rules light. But I'm talking about Starfleet battles and that kind of stuff, or Squad Commander. I managed to wrap my head around Tobruk, I think, but I think if there was a real expert there, he'd probably correct me on a lot of the stuff that I was doing wrong. But I played the hell out of Tobruk by Avalon Hill. But I'm not very good at those kind of really detailed rules. What people would call crunch, right? Detailed, heavy math, that kind of thing. Doing a lot of calculating, that kind of stuff. So I've since found a whole bunch of simplified wargame rules, and I love those, like chess, right, or Go, Wei Chai. I love those games because they're very simplified rules. They allow for you to strategize and play in a logical way, without having to know all these tons of rules or even having read them, because I can read them. I'm not going to retain them. So I have played Starfleet battles. and other really complicated games like that, and they were a lot of fun. But when I did, somebody else knew the rules and was the expert and would correct me when I would do things wrong. Sad to say, and so I think that's why I don't think I'm alone in that boat. I think a lot of people kind of shy away from war games like that, and so tabletop RPGs, particularly Dungeons and Dragons, became something new, but it came from that. And so, yeah, I really like the premise that it was played differently back in the day, if you like. I think it's accurate. I think it probably was. So yeah, like I say, please leave a like and thumbs up, and please subscribe if you want to see more from my channel. And for sure, please leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear what you think about this. Are you a browser? Do you play this style of game? I'd love to know. It's fascinating. I'm really actually want to play this. I don't know enough people to pull it off, I don't think, though. I think you'd want at least 10, 15 people, right? That are hardcore into wargaming, and I don't think I can pull that off. But man, I would love to try it. It sounds really intriguing. And like I say, it coincides with my memories of the first game extremely well. So, like when I first started playing, for example, I think I've mentioned this in other videos before. The DM that DM'd our game, he had the rules. We had this book, but he had never read them, and he didn't even know what a 20-sided die was for. So he would just roll the die and dump monsters out. It was fun because sometimes he'd have to pull the monsters back because he realized he put too many out and they were going to kill us all, and then he would roll. And it was quite into the game before we realized he didn't even understand what the dice were for. I don't know if you can hear that whining. It's my dog in the background. She doesn't like me talking. But anyway, so that was sort of, and I don't think I was alone in that everybody was sort of discovering this game at the same time. Everybody was sort of, nobody I knew how to play it, except, like I say, those original people, but I never played with them again. So we were sort of left to our own devices to make it up. And I made the games up often until I finally got the rules, and then finally one day I got these rules, and then I was able to sort of explore and put things together a lot better. But I think that's how the evolution happened. Yeah. Anyway, I'm rambling now, so I'll leave. Please subscribe. I really want to get to 1,000 patrons so I can have a YouTube patrons, 1,000 subscribers, so that I can get a community going, so I can post stuff in there like maps and art and whatever else. And please leave a thumbs up. It really helps. And please leave a comment. I'd love to know what you think of this. Do you think it's off the mark? Have you played it before? What's it like to play? That kind of thing. All right. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next time.